a Toy Biz package using a Kenner figure. Really, really crazy stuff back then. Kind of that stuff would never, you'd never be able to pull that off nowadays. So here is my Kenner Superpowers collection. This is a complete collection, every figure, every accessory. I have a couple of the international variants that I'll get into at the end there, but this was a line that was, you know, on my radar, and I knew I wanted this collection. There were so many reasons why. I'm a huge DC fan, but this line is great, and you know, like I come in every day and I get to see this line. It kind of makes me happy. It's like something that, you know, you look at it and you're like, wow, that's so cool. And also it gives me like inspiration to kind of, you know, do the stuff that I do. So my first experience with Kenner Superpowers was at a flea market. I was probably about, I think like maybe like 10 years old. And I didn't know Superpowers. I'd never had any and I'd never seen any. But I was at a flea market and, you know, my mom had got me, you know, the Batmobile right here. Awesome part of the line. She got me the Batmobile, which was all beat up, you know, none of the windows were there. And it came with Batman, Robin, and the Joker. So it was like, you know, a complete play like in one purchase. And back then, it probably cost you like $10, which is nuts. But I remember like loving that Batmobile, Batman, Robin, Joker. Like I said, I could just play and they could battle the Joker in one purchase. So that was my first experience with Superpowers. And then, you know, as you get older in toy magazines and this and that, you start to see like what this line was. And then, you know, as I got older and I had the means to be able to get, you know, this line, because it's not a cheap line to get. As we get to the older figures, you know, we'll talk about like the rarity and what, you know, what the collecting burden they are. But it started out with, you know, with your A-listers right out of the bat and like the first wave. And that was Batman, Superman, Robin, Flash, Green Lantern, Wonder Woman, Joker, Aquaman, Penguin, Lex Luthor, like, and it was like, you look at this line, it was, you know, they talk about toyetic is a term that gets thrown around a lot. Like this line was toyetic. Like DC characters were bright and they were colorful. And the reason this line looks so good is because it went off of artwork from a very talented classic DC artist at the time, Jose Luis Garcia Lopez. His artwork is fantastic, and they used his designs. I think he did all the inputs for these, and like they literally created his, you know, these figures from his art right off the page, and that's why they look so good. Like Batman is one of the best looking Batman figures ever. You know, that Joker, still to this day, I say it's the best looking Joker figure ever. And Kenner even ended up using a lot of these in later lines, you know, the Dark Knight line years later. But, you know, so this Superpowers line impacted so much moving forward. They, you know, they used parts for the Robin Hood Prince of Thieves line, which is kind of crazy. Kenner did a lot of that back then. But as far as like a pure toy line, this line was great. You know, they had their action features. You squeeze their legs like Superman did his power punch. Same thing with Batman. Robin chopped, Flash ran. And it's gimmicky, but at the time, you know, it was something new. Like toy lines weren't really doing gimmicky. The only superhero line before Superpowers was Mego. And Mego were, you know, like this Spider-Man up here. They were a taller, like 7-8 inch cloth figure with articulation, but no features. So Kenner decided to start using these action features, which was really cool. And, you know, the figures were constructed well. But, you know, nowadays, like a lot of the action features don't work on some of these figures, but I'm okay with that. It's just, to me, it's like the essence of the line is what's important. You know, things were lost over time. You know, Wonder Woman's lasso, which I have an original lasso. All this stuff is original. A lot of it got lost over time. Green Arrow came with 2 small arrows, but it was just such a great line right off the bat. You know, that's Superman, Flash. Like I said, like this initial run was really, really epic because you had a great mix of your A-list heroes, you had your A-list villains, and then once you even started getting into, you know, the secondary characters like Martian Manhunter and Hawkman, like those are great figures. You know, the one thing that I was found awesome, like later on in life when I started to get in product development, is how they came up with the way that the cape attaches to the neck. You know, for those of you who don't know superpowers, there's the soft goods cape, but inside is like a plastic ring that they sew into the cape, and it like, you know, it snaps on to around the neck. And it was a very smart way of doing it. It doesn't make it overly bulky, and you know, it fits on really well. So, you know, there's a bunch of characters in the line with capes. Martian Manhunter, his was a little different. His was exposed. Same thing with Shazam. But like Superman, Batman, and Robin all have that same, you know, kind of C clamp, you know, sewn into the cape, which is really cool. Green Lantern, another great figure, and you know, as we get into this stuff later in the international stuff, we'll talk about how Green Lantern was used again, but you know, typical Kenner thing. But again, like really bright and colorful. You look at this line, and it's just in your face, and it's not like a bad way. It's just all the colors, like everyone's different, and awesome in a really good way. You know, they introduced Vac Metal with Brainiac, made him a little, you know, fragile. You know, trying to find one with the, you know, the arm still intact is kind of hard because you had to, whereas the other, most of the figures you squeeze the leg, Brainiac, you squeezed his arm and he kicked. So you're putting a lot of torque on that arm, and you find a lot of the Brainiac figures, their arms are broken. Also the Vac Metal, over time, it flakes and it deteriorates, but luckily I found a good version that had his all intact. So, you know, up in the back, you had some more villains. You had Steppenwolf, and you had Darkseid. Darkseid's, you know, the big bad of the line. He was cool because he was the first big figure, and he had light piping in his head, which was a gimmicky thing in the 80s and 90s. But Darkseid was cool. He's so much bigger than everyone else, but it's like he was the same price point. It wasn't like they had deluxe figures back then. They just put him in the line because he was big. You know, he was a great figure. And then they had their first mail away with Clark Kent, which, again, for a guy just in a suit with glasses, the Clark Kent figure is really, really cool. I think looking at, you know, the way suited figures are done nowadays with soft PVC and this and that, they didn't have that back then. They didn't have sort of those secondary soft PVC technologies, you know, as much. Like you saw it a little bit with Desaad, but not with Clark Kent. So the way they did his suit, as you know, and made his legs still articulate, was very, very clever. You know, things like Penguin, you know, kind of a bigger, plumper guy, like how you get good articulation with a figure like that. So it was really well done, you know, designing and engineering with this line. So, you know, for a line that was as impactful, it didn't really run that long. I think it was only 84 to 86. Once you got past like your A-listers, and as we get into, you know, the third tier kind of characters, you could see why the line sort of maybe fell apart. But, you know, the A-list ones, it was such an impact right off the bat. And they went pretty deep. You know, your Hall of Justice, and they had a bunch of different vehicles. Not great vehicles like the Justice Jogger, but, you know, the Batmobile was great. You know, I think they had the Batcopter, which ended up being used in the Kenner Dark Knight run later on. But it was great right off the bat. So then once you leave, you know, the A-listers and this awesome, impactful line, you get into these second, third, fourth tier characters, which weren't very well known. I know there was times where I still don't even know a lot of these characters, and, you know, like Cyclotron. I don't think I ever read a comic that had Cyclotron in it. But they got into like cooler features and more accessories and cooler deco, but it was just unfortunate that the line didn't do well, and it started to fail and not do well at retail, and ended up, you know, this being the last of it. But you come in, you get characters like Red Tornado, again, very, very cool character. Firestorm, which I ended up getting Firestorm like later after I had gotten the initial Batman, Robin, Joker, Batmobile. And I thought Firestorm was so cool. He's got fire for hair. You know, how could you beat that? Desaad is pretty cool. He's got Vac Metal, and he's got, you know, they got ropes. Like, this was probably an expensive figure to make for them. He's got Vac Metal, he's got deco, he's got a PVC secondary, he's got deco on his legs, he's got the ropes that attach to his backpack. Like, he was definitely one of the more expensive figures for being such a kind of a crap third tier character. You know, just being, you know, Darkseid's sort of henchman. Calabac, another decently big figure. Mantis, the Parademons, you know, cool villains. It gave you definitely a good array of villains for your heroes to fight, which is nice, because you never want to have a line where it's like, you know, 10 heroes and like 2 bad guys. You always want to have a lot of bad guys to fight, especially with superheroes. You want to make it, you know, seem kind of fair. At least that was in my kid fighting world. But then up here, you start to get like really, really great characters. So Dr. Fate is probably one of my top 3 favorite figures in the line. I think he's just such a cool figure. His colors are bright and vibrant. His mask always looked cool. Cyclotron, like I was saying, I had no idea who he was, but it's cool. He's got a cool feature, whereas, you know, that face pops off and he's a robot underneath. Samurai is cool. He's got soft goods. He's a hard one to get because he was a rarer figure, and then the soft goods and the sword are hard to keep intact. Mr. Freeze was one at the end. He was a more expensive figure. He's the same Mr. Freeze that basically Toy Biz used in the DC superheroes line in the 90s, except they took out some of his articulation. They took out basically his features, his freeze gun shoot back and forth. They took off the ropes. They really cost reduced him. But then the Toy Biz one, they made it so that when you put him in the freezer, he turned blue. So that was kind of cool. But this Mr. Freeze is super hard to get, especially with his dome on his head. I want to say that the Toy Biz one, they ended up gluing it, so it wasn't easy to lose like the Superpowers one. You have Green Arrow, which is probably one of the most ridiculous figures in the line as far as like what he came with. This is like, you know, a kid's worst nightmare of just losing stuff, because he came with this bow and 2 little arrows, and the bow's, you know, string can pop off. It's basically the same bow that they use for the Robin Hood Prince of Thieves line. And basically Green Arrow is the same figure for Robin Hood, and the Robin Hood figure even has the G on the belt, which Green Arrow has. But it's like losing that string, losing the 2 arrows. So like finding this figure now will cost you a lot just because of the arrows alone. So he's definitely a tough one. In the middle, you got Golden Pharaoh, another character like I never knew about, but he was cool. He's got a translucent chest. He's got translucent like cowl that comes up and over. He's got a weird arm-raising, bird-flapping action feature, which is odd. And then you have Plastic Man, which for a kind of a silly-looking character, he's just fun. You know, big goofy smile on his face, neck extends. Orion's up there with his switching heads, tire. You know, average bag up. But then you get like Shazam. Shazam is such a cool figure, and like I was saying, he's got a rope that connects his you know, his cape. So they had to make him a little different. But again, later in the line, he's hard to get. You have Mr. Miracle with his handcuffs, and then you have like the creme de la creme of the line, the unicorn, the one that's like everyone's grail in the Superpowers line, and that is Cyborg. Cyborg at the end of the line, you know, with it dying, it kind of like what they did with, you know, the Dick Tracy line with the blank. They end up sending some of these last run figures to international markets like Canada or the UK. You know, it's happened with the Secret Wars line over there with the Electro and the Iceman and the Constrictor. Those ones went international, and they're the hard ones to get. And Cyborg went to Canada, and I believe he went to the UK, because I think I've seen some packaging with UK variants on it. But he's super hard to get. He was a short run. Also, it's hard to get him in super condition. Like, I splurged and got one that was perfectly mint. All his vac metal, his paint, everything is perfect, because as I said, the vac metal will tend to deteriorate, and you'll see it start to rub off, and he's almost like a yellow plastic underneath. But he had vac metal, and then they painted his flesh tone over that vac metal. So it's like, you know, once everything starts going, that figure can like deteriorate real fast. And then he's got these hand attachments that are easily losable. They attach to his back. So I have all that, and that's why he's kind of in a secondary case in there, because he's, you know, he's perfect. You know, it's like, I could get them graded, but I don't like the idea of grading stuff. I think action figures should sort of breathe. You know, same thing with comics. I don't like the idea of grading stuff. But putting them in a little extra protection is okay. And then rounding out it all, a lot of people don't consider these part of the Superpowers line because they were international variants and they were almost like, not bootlegs because they were licensed, but they weren't technically on official Superpowers cards. And that is the Argentina, I believe are they both Argentina? One's maybe Argentina, Brazil, Mexico. One of the, South America, Mexico area was the Batman and the Riddler. Now, we'll talk about the Riddler first. The Riddler is basically Green Lantern. So as I was saying, we know the second use of Green Lantern. So that Riddler figure still has the Green Lantern ring on, but he was a cool looking sculpt with a mask on. So I guess they figured, oh, it's just easy to make a Riddler out of Green Lantern. And, this figure, which was cool, as a cool feature that Mattel did was this figure was notorious for his upper body and his upper legs and his arms were molded in one green color. And then his lower legs were like molded in almost like a lighter translucent green. So you wonder, like, the legs should have been in the same mold. So you wonder why those lower legs became a different color and like a more translucent, like it was just weird. But the whole run of Riddlers is like that. And then Mattel, when they did their DC collectors line, the 6-inch Riddler, they did a Riddler and then they gave him a lighter green lower legs, almost like a throwback to that original Superpowers line, which is, when you see designers doing that stuff, like, that's cool because they're really like acknowledging what came before. And something as rare and obscure as the Riddler, people wonder, like, well, why are his legs different? It's because of that reason. So it's cool. I applaud them for doing something like that. And then the last guy is the Black Suit Batman. So, this line, like I said, ran from 84 to 86. And then that figure came out when 89 Batman came out. But I guess what they did was they had the mold for the Superpowers figure, and Toy Biz hadn't done their new Batman yet. So they just issued the Superpowers Batman in all black, which is really cool because he's a better looking figure than the Toy Biz one. I know the Toy Biz one is based off the movie, but the Superpowers Batman just looked so cool. So the fact that they decided to go that route and do that Batman is very cool. Now, his deco's not the greatest because he's an import figure and, their stuff in their factories is not done as well. But he's still a very, very cool figure to get. So if you have the chance to get him, they're getting up there in price, you should get one because he's really cool. And then the interesting thing is, if you look on the back of the Toy Biz movie Batman package, there is a Superpowers Batman painted all black that they added the stretchy belt feature to. So they didn't have the new Batman yet. So they used the Superpower Batman on the back of that Toy Biz package, which is weird because it's a Toy Biz package using a Kenner figure. Really, really crazy stuff back then. Kind of that stuff you'd never be able to pull that off nowadays. But back then, it was the Wild West and there was really no restrictions. They didn't care. People were just, toy companies were just doing wild stuff. So that whole Black Suit Batman Superpowers fiasco is kind of funny to think about it like that. But that's it, guys. That is the Superpowers line. Hopefully I gave you guys some good insight into, maybe things they were doing, thought process, my take on the design element of it. And, I can't say enough really good things about this line. I think everything is great. If you take, the best figure and the worst figure, they're really not off by much because I just think that this line really holds up, even though, there are characters that are further down the line, not A-list guys like Superman and Batman, it's still just impactful and just really great looking figures. So, I was born in 82, so I was still very, very little when this line was at its peak. I wish I could have been like 7 years old, in 84 when this line like just hit and took off, because I feel like this line would have been my favorite line as a kid. There was a lot of good toys to choose from, but Superpowers was right up there for me. And again, me being a big DC fan, this line is important to me. It means a lot. It's just cool as a fan, as a collector, and also as a product developer. This line kind of has it all for me. So hopefully you enjoyed my take on Kenner Superpowers. And yeah, love to hear your comments below on what you think of Kenner Superpowers line.